Thanks a lot. And you guys are. I forgot to mention that we have hot dogs. We have hot dogs, right, Charlie? Great. So because it's a Chicago book, hot dogs. They're for my friend Rob Fresco. He loves hot dogs, and he's here tonight. So, but they're for everybody. And I think there might be enough for like half a hot dog. I don't know. We got a lot of hot dogs, though, don't we? No one's gonna eat these hot dogs. Oh, good. I hope everyone eats them. So, if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to talk a little from here. So, if not, that's fine too. Yeah, I think I'm signing books at the back, at the front. This is Sue.
I confessed to hearing you on Sedge Thompson the other day when I was surprised when you mentioned Oda Pavel's book. So I was you're the second person in my life that I know that read that book. So and I'm now starting to read it. Can you tell me how you got into that book? Or how what? I don't know, it's a dumb question.
No, it's not a dumb question. The name Popper is also a philosopher, famous philosopher who nobody reads, Karl Popper.
Yeah,
we make fun of him. Sue reads him. But the name Popper is a little homage to a favorite writer of mine named Ada Pavel, who, because he was Jewish in the Czechoslovakia back in those times, he changed his name to Pavel to be more Czech, I guess. Anyway, he was a beautiful writer, and he wrote a book called How to Fish.
How I Came to Know.
How I Came to Know Fish.
Sorry.
How I Came to Know Fishing. Storyline Press. Sue has it in her hands. The reason that I know about this guy is because he's buried in the same cemetery as Kafka. And when I was, as people do when they're in Prague, they go visit Kafka, there was a little sign saying, Ada Pavel that way. And I was like, and Kafka this way. And they were sort of like on par with each other. And I was like, well, who's Ada Pavel? And it's an absolutely glorious book about a crazy mixed up family. And it was just a private joke to myself because that's not really well known that he changed his name from Popper. But the reason I know that is because when I went to his grave, his name was not Ada Pavel, it was Ada Popper. And I was like, oh, there's something to this. So in my own way, I gave him a little props. Although I should have actually officially gave him props. I did. I could talk more about it. Yes?
Question: you write a book that shifts back and forth in time quite a bit. Did you write out a lot of 3x5 cards and juggle them, or do you find yourself writing beginning, middle, and?
The question has to do with time and writing, jumping through time, and if I use 3x5 cards and juggle them. And I didn't use 3x5 cards, but I definitely did a lot of juggling. In some ways, like the way I read this story tonight could just as easily, I'm like, hey, I could restructure this, it could be this way. And it could go this way, because the variables are endlessly, the combinations, like it's not a set in stone kind of thing. It kept changing up until the very end. So, but when I was writing it, I wasn't always in the same, I wasn't always in the same era of these people's lives. I was going from much of the book is having to do with these Seymour and Bernice and their lives in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So I was always I could sort of pick and choose where I wanted to go, but that's because I'm scatterbrained and inconsistent. So for me, this worked, but I don't recommend it for everybody. So for nobody, I recommend it for nobody. So, any more questions? Yes.
Is Bernice the only female character that you get inside the head of as a writer, or do you get inside of Miriam or any of the other female characters?
Yes, Miriam and Bernice, and to a lesser extent, Kat. And I think there's a reason for that. I think Kat is a harder nut for him to get to, and I think that's part of the deal. But Miriam is very much kind of the heart of the book in a lot of ways, and we didn't see her much tonight except for her laughing, but she's very much present. So yeah, she ends the book, I suppose. So, thank you for asking. Yes, Tom.
you want to talk about the cover? Because I know your brother and his role in it. So,
Yeah, my brother did the cover, and he did the drawings inside the book, and he's a wonderful illustrator, and I was really lucky that he was able to do that. I had a stricture with him. He's a cartoonist and a really great cartoonist, but I didn't want him to draw people, so we fought at first because he wanted to draw the people, and I really was insistent that I wanted the book to be people-less, at least drawing-wise. Because when I read it depends on what book, but sometimes I don't want to have somebody else's imagination tell me what the people look like, you know what I mean? So, but I was really lucky, and the publisher decided to do it, and that was a rare thing that they decided to do the right thing. No. I mean, no offense to my publisher. Although they are in the news today with something controversial, which I won't mention.
That's the same.
Plagiarism issue. Dan.
The book is political in a lot of ways, by which I mean that what Popper and the People remembers has a lot to do with politics, specifically Chicago politics, and I associate fiction from Chicago with politics. Maybe it's Saul Bellow, it's in my brain, but I'm wondering, what does politics mean to you or to Popper in this book, and do you see this book as a political book in any way?
Yeah, I mean, political in the sense of like the stories of politics. I in my family, it was like come Thanksgiving, it's all we're going to talk about. I mean, and I have to study up on like congressional races in like Colorado to go home so that I can be ready to go and talk about that kind of stuff. So I grew up in this incredibly strangely obsessive, and my father, he did run for office and did lose. My stepfather was a more successful politician. He was the mayor of my hometown for 16 years before he was beaten by his arch rival, and then he came back 4 years later and beat his arch rival. So my whole life was this fight between Ray Geraci and my stepfather, Dan Pierce. But politics was definitely in our everything about what we were doing. But one thing the book kind of talks about is that the family in the book moved to the suburbs, but were obsessively interested in what was going on in the city. And at that time, Richard J. Daley, not Richard M. Daley, the one that people maybe are more familiar with now, but the old man reigned supreme like a king, and he was like he was a deity to my family. I mean, he was a monster as far as I'm concerned now, but an interesting monster, and his son was interesting too. But there was all kinds of really interesting politics that happened, including the election of the first woman mayor of Chicago, Jane Byrne, who makes an appearance in the book, who was an incredibly fascinating figure. She was a terrible mayor, but man, was she a great campaigner that year she won. It was the most exciting thing ever when Jane Byrne beat the machine politician, mostly because of a snowstorm. And then following Jane Byrne was beaten by the first African-American mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, who also kind of makes a walk-on appearance in the book. The father works for Richard J. Daley, so he's against all these newcomers. But Harold Washington was a genuine article. He was a real reform mayor in the city of Chicago, and we saw it, and then it was such a brief glimmer. And then he won re-election. It was incredible, and then he promptly dropped dead because he was incredibly unhealthy in his eating habits, but he was a great man. I was actually going to bring the Harold Washington poster, but Katie said, why would you do that? Anyway. Hot dogs, anybody? Is that, Olga, I'll take one more question, how's that? And I don't want to trap people.
How did you decide to use the grandfather's letters as the other organizing principle?
How did I decide to use the grandfather's letters as the other organizing principle in the book? It was because the book was so unorganized. I had to have a lot of organizing principles, and I guess the letters were a way of looking back towards a time when things may have been different for one of the relationships. And there's 3 or 4 key relationships in the book. That's sort of the axis of things. And Bernice and Seymour. Seymour goes away to the war, and he writes obsessively to Bernice, and she doesn't write him back. And this was pretty much based on my own family's history. When my grandfather did go to the war, I have this entire cache of letters, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. Not a single letter from her was saved. And what I gathered from reading his letters, which I used liberally in the book and changed in my own fictional way, because I'm incapable of kind of being straight up about the truth. But one of the motifs that I didn't have to make up was that my grandfather was out there, you know, wailing for her to write him back. And every time he would reach port, there would be no letters. And there's in fact one heartbreaking letter that I just totally used in the book. My grandfather was a pretty writer, so I didn't have to, you know, some of these I didn't change that much. But he said, I arrived in Guam or whatever, and there were 17 letters waiting for him, and not one from you. And that broke my heart. So it made me think about a fictional relationship in a way. You know, we carry all this heartbreak around, and what the next generation knows about it may be only what they know, but there's stuff out there that's going to show you how that relationship evolved and changed and how it was different. So that was sort of what I was getting at there. And they were just heartbreaking, almost poems. And so I thought of using them in the book as a way of talking not just about Bernice and Seymour's relationship, but about Miriam and Philip and Kat and Popper, and also about Leo and Popper and their brother relationship, which is the other relationship in the book. So, well, great. Well, thank you very much.